In this very in-depth forecast, the Midwest is currently being monitored for significant severe weather, as scattered severe storms could harbor the potential for a few tornadoes, some of which could be strong, scattered damaging wind gusts, and scattered large hail. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for March 19th of 2025. Today we have an enhanced risk for the Midwestern regions, primarily for central Illinois into portions of western Indiana, with a slight risk that extends all the way into Ohio, portions of southeastern Michigan, and even back into portions of eastern Iowa there. We also have a broad marginal risk that extends down into Kentucky, western into central Tennessee, northern into central and northwestern mainly of Alabama, and central, northern, and mainly around the northeastern half of Mississippi there. Risks for today do include a 10% tornado risk with the possibility of some significant tornadoes across this area. This is going to be the primary risk for this enhanced risk region and the primary thing that we're going to be covering in today's forecast. I probably will have a live stream for this after this forecast video. We also have a 15% damaging wind gust risk for the potential of some scattered damaging wind gusts, as well as the potential for some scattered large hail with a 15% hail risk there. For our day 2 outlook, we don't really have any severe areas that we're looking out for tomorrow, but we do have TTS TM risk for some areas. Same with our day 3 outlook. And then for our day 4, day 8 outlook, we do have a day 5 15% that we are currently monitoring for southern Arkansas, portions of Mississippi, northern into central, and even portions of southern Louisiana and eastern Texas there. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast as well as our winter weather forecast, for today we don't really have a risk of flash flooding that we're looking out for, same with tomorrow or Friday, but we do have a day 5 marginal risk for two areas actually, extending into eastern Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi there, as well as a marginal risk for the Olympic Peninsula into portions of extreme northwestern Oregon there. For our winter weather forecast for today, we are expected to see uh, a long band of some pretty heavy snowfall with upwards of 70% chance for snowfall greater than 8 inches, or sorry, 4 inches across this area. We do have a forecast for 8 inches as well that we can look at. And we do have a 70% chance for snowfall around the Omaha region into portions of Iowa there, upwards of a 70% chance for snowfall greater than 8 inches across that area, as well as the rest of that band. So definitely make sure that you're watching the weather if you do live in the area that's expected to see some pretty heavy snowfall. However, we will not be covering it in today's forecast. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars and the rest of our upper level winds after this, and how that's going to support our risk for severe thunderstorms across this area. We do have a nice negatively tilted trough here with a very, very nice amount of defluence aloft at our 500 millibars. Right around the enhanced risk area, we are expected to see some really nice defluence with our wind vector spreading. That is going to support some widespread lift across this area and exemplify that risk for severe thunderstorms, as well as this really nice jet here that is going to support a lot of decent speed shear across this area and support a risk for hail as well. Taking a look at our 700 millibars and how that's going to support our risk for tornadoes across this area, specifically looking at our low-level jet here, we are expected to see a really nice low-level jet that is going to strengthen out of the south with 700 millibar flow. That does look like it's expected to get upwards 50 to 55, potentially even approaching 60 knots in some areas. That is going to support a lot of curved photographs, a really nice directional shear across that area, and support our risk for tornadoes, potentially even the potential for strong tornadoes across this area. I said that twice. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to support our risk for severe thunderstorms overall and our risk for hail. We do have some decent defluence aloft that is kind of surrounding the entire risk for severe thunderstorms up to the north here around the Midwest, and that's gonna support even more lift across that area, and again exemplify that risk for severe thunderstorms. Even at our 500 millibars as well, but it is further exemplified at our 200 millibars as well. As far as our risk for hail goes, we are expected to see 200 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 100 knots, potentially even 110 in some areas, and that is going to support some pretty decent speed shear across that area and some really nice sheared storms, the potential for some large hail. Taking a look at our storm relativity and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent storm relativity values across this region that are going to be indicative of the potential for tornadoes, maybe even some strong tornadoes as well, with storm relativity values that seem to be getting upwards of 200 meters squared a second squared, and potentially even upwards of the mid 200s as well. And this is going to be a cold core setup, so when we look at our instability is going to be pretty low, and you're probably going to be thinking, why are we seeing the potential for some significant tornadoes? And to be honest, I am questioning it myself as well. However, we have to remember that what we want to look for when it comes to cold core setups is not most unstable cape or surface-based cape, but our 0 to 3 kilometer instability is what typically fuels these setups during a cold core setup. Taking a look at our 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear and how that's going to support our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear values, upwards of 50 knots and potentially even some 60 knots. And that's going to be pretty indicative of the potential for some large hail across this region. However, our hail risk is definitely going to be a little bit more limited, especially with our more limited instability and our limited moisture across this region. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms in turn, we are expected to see some decent temperatures across this region that are going to be a little bit more on the more moderate side of things. However, decently conducive for some instability across this area. Temperatures that are going to be getting upwards of 60 to potentially even 65 degrees across this region, maybe even some isolated 70 degrees. However, you can also see our systems quite clearly here, especially our cold front that's going to be draped down across this risk that is going to be firing those potentially more discrete cells across the enhanced risk region, as well as our surface low here and our warm front that is going to be draped across the north. However, those storms are going to be firing across that cold front, and with a lack of instability and also a little bit of an EML that is in place across this region, that should keep storms more discreet, but also more low-topped, as we don't really have a whole lot of instabilities to begin with the majority of our instability being at our very lowest levels. However, still supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our instability across this region, you can also see our setup even clearly here. Our cold front is a lot more defined, same with our warm front and our surface low. However, as far as our moisture goes, we are expected to see dew point values are probably going to be around the 50s, maybe approaching 55, but mainly hovering around the low 50s. That is going to support some pretty weak instability overall, with a lot of our instability being more limited down to our surface. We will look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability. However, just know that when we look at our most unstable cape and our surface-based cape, there won't really be a whole lot to look at. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for all hazards across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rates values across this region, getting upwards of 7 to 8. And what that will do, that will support the potential for some greater instability. However, again, keep in mind our instability is going to be pretty limited, especially with how weak our moisture is across this region. So we don't really have a whole lot to work with to begin with. However, our lapse rates will definitely uphold that risk for large hail across this region, allowing for hailstones to get bigger for longer. And it will also support our risk for damaging wind gusts across this region, as it will allow for stronger winds from the upper levels to mix down to the surface. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms, primarily our instability, we are expected to see a pretty nice clearing already existing across this area. We do have a little bit of cloud cover across the enhanced risk region, a little bit of low level more mid-level clouds there that does extend into the enhanced risk region. However, it is mostly sunny across that area, which is going to support greater surface heating and in turn greater surface instability and greater 0 to 3 kilometer instability. Again, keep in mind our moisture is pretty low, our temperature is pretty low. We don't really have a whole lot to work with, so the environment's working with what it has to support what it can with the little instability that it can provide. Taking a look at our most unstable cape here and how that's going to fuel our severe thunderstorms across this region, partly because again we're going to be looking at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability for that. We do have some very weak most unstable cape across this region. Most unstable cape values that are going to be mainly around 500 joules per kilogram, 700 joules per kilogram, maybe approaching 1000 joules per kilogram in some areas. However, it is going to stay mostly around the 500, 750 joules per kilogram, probably not going to be getting above 1000 joules per kilogram. And that's all right because, again, we're going to have to look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability for this, but this most unstable cape is definitely going to be sufficient enough to fuel some risk, or at least aid in fueling some risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, despite how low it is. It is going to be, again, pretty low, but it is going to do some marginal assistance to the environment. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how that is going to affect our risk for surface-based storms across this area, it does look like the majority of our surface-based cape is going to be stemming from our most unstable cape, meaning that storms are going to be surface-based, so we shouldn't really have too much of a problem with surface-based storms, which is going to support that risk for tornadoes across this region. As far as our convective inhibition goes, again, we do have a little bit of an EML across this region, and it should remain in place whenever storms do fire. However, the EML is pretty weak, but it should aid a little bit in keeping storms more discreet and further exemplifying that risk for tornadoes across this region. As you can tell, our risk for tornadoes is pretty conditional. At least our risk for significant tornadoes is conditional and is relying on multiple different varying factors that may not really all work the way that we want it to support a increased tornado risk. So it is pretty conditional. We could see the potential for some significant tornadoes. We might not. It really all depends. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and our primary fueling factor for the storms that are going to be across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region. 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that are going to be getting upwards of a around 100 joules per kilogram, which does appear to be around the equivalent of like around 1000 joules per kilogram of instability across this region. If it was most unstable cape or surface-based cape, that isn't going to translate into our most unstable cape or surface-based cape, but we will see some pretty decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this area that is going to be the primary fueling factor for the potential for significant tornadoes across this region, as well as our storms overall. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to support our risk for tornadoes across this region, where our ingredients for tornadoes are going to be overlapping. We do have some decent energy helicity index values across an enhanced risk region, with energy helicity index values that seem to be getting upwards of 1 to potentially even 2, 2.5 in some areas. And those energy helicity index values do look like they are going to increase as storms move more so into Indiana. And to be honest, based on some of the things I've been seeing, I wouldn't be surprised if they did extend the 10% tornado risk into Indiana a little bit, regardless of what time of day it will be, as storms do appear that they'll remain somewhat discreet, but still somewhat messy. However, it does look like we are going to see greater 0 to 3 kilometer instability develop across that area. Same with overall greater most unstable cape and greater surface-based cape. And overall just greater, stronger ingredients for the potential of tornadoes as storms move more so into Illinois and Indiana right along the border there. And even our low-level jet is expected to be at its strongest as storms move into Illinois, into Indiana. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did extend the 10% tornado risk further into Indiana. Taking a look at our STP here and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent, significant tornado parameter values across this region. They're going to be indicative of the possibility of maybe some strong tornadoes. With significant tornado parameter values, they're going to be getting upwards of 2, the mid 2s, potentially even approaching 3 in some areas, but mainly remaining around 2, especially as storms move more so into Indiana, where when that low-level jet increases, the greatest overlap for our instability and our low-level jet does appear to be more so back into um, Illinois. However, as far as what I was mentioning with them potentially extending that 10% tornado risk more so into Indiana, it definitely won't be a far extension. It will probably extend just a little bit further eastward, not really by much though. Taking a look at our mesoanalysis products, starting off with our decape and our risk for damaging wind gusts across this region. We do have some decent decape. It's going to be pretty weak. Decape that's going to be getting upwards of 70 joules per kilogram. Um, and 60 joules per kilogram. So we won't really have a whole lot of decape across this region, but it will definitely be sufficient for a risk for damaging wind gusts across this region. But again, it's not going to be the primary risk. As far as our hail risk goes, um, we can start off with our significant hail. We don't really have any areas for significant hail. We do have a zero point 0.5 there. As far as our SARS hail size go, still in that same area. And for our large hail parameter, we do have an area up to the north there, indicating overall that there is going to be the potential for some hail, as a lot of our ingredients are lining up across this region, but it's not really consistent from product to product. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator. Enjoy the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong this forecast, or you'd like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys later on the live stream.